We're going to end out the year with a good one. Today's topic is going to be breaking up outputs by problem or goal or focus area, whichever your coalition kind of recognizes as being your ultimate goals or problems that you're working on. The purpose of today is going to be to walk through an example to show you kind of the natural steps that I would take, that I have taken to help kind of train people on how to break up their outputs by problem goal. I don't have too much content. There is quite a little bit, I guess you'd say. We're going to go through one example today, and we're going to go really in depth through it. So that's going to be the main focus of today, is going through that example, making sure we're all on the same page, understanding how to break up our entries, because this can be a big task, right? A lot of times, Reach in itself is a lot. Data tracking, I can tell you that probably no one loves data tracking and putting data in. If you do and it's your thing, totally get it. That's how some people are. Other people, it's just, this long drawn out process of entering data. And it just feels so like it's a lot to do at some points. And I completely get that. And then when you tack on trying to break up your outputs and your data by problem goal, it just makes it even bigger, right? It makes it seem almost unaccomplishable, right? Because there's just so much to enter. So the goal today is to get you feeling a lot more comfortable doing this and not feeling overwhelmed. With that, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first things first is I like to go through kind of the different steps that we have when it comes to breaking up our Reach entries. This is typically the steps that I will take our clients through if we're kind of having a TA session to work on one of these. I will start out with the main thing being the description, right? We got to know what's happening. So I have them write out a description or type one up in case of we're actually working in Reach. The next thing I will have them do is really identify the outputs to record. So this is helpful from, a tracking standpoint to make sure you get everything tracked that you need to for an event, as well as helping you recognize whether or not you should be splitting this up or breaking it up to reflect different problem goals. So I usually have them start there because it's really helpful. Next step I have is to identify the problem goal for our data that we're putting in. And here's where a lot of times we get into that problem, not really a problem, but it's more of we can't select more than one problem goal in Reach, right? That's not something that most of our clients have. However, we do understand that there are certain activities and events that you guys are doing that are specific towards your goals that you're working on, but they're addressing more than one goal, right? You might have an event, you might have a community change that you're working on that's specific towards a goal or towards two goals. And it's not just as simple as the general ATOD work that we do, right? We know that we do some of that general work in our communities, and it's great to be able to still track it. However, we also recognize that we are doing targeted work sometimes. It just happens that we're targeting two problems at once. So we want to be able to identify those and break up our entries to reflect that accurately. So that's kind of the next step, is really identifying the problem goal and identifying if there is more than one. Because if so, that'll help us recognize, hey, we're going to have to split this up into two different entries. So that's our third step. The fourth step is actually splitting those up, and that can be a process sometimes in itself, depending on what you're recording or what this activity or output is. It could require multiple splits. You might be working on 3 problems. You might be working on 2. You might have to split here but not split here. There's different things that go into that, and it's kind of a nuance area within Reach that I really I'm glad that we're talking about today, because a lot of people don't always know how to do this or don't feel comfortable doing it. So really, when we get to that recording the split entries, we're going to get into that today and show you how I would do that. And then the next step we have is recording our non-split entries. So sometimes you might actually be recording an output that has an entity within it that needs to be split, right? Let's say, we're going to get into our example here in a second, but let's say that we have to split the service provided, but maybe we don't have to split the media. That's okay. And sometimes it happens. So don't feel weird if you're splitting in one area and not in the other. It's just making sure that we're really thinking through all these steps to ensure that we're recording everything right. And then lastly, we have double check your entries. I always encourage people, especially when splitting things by problem goal, to make sure that you are double checking, because sometimes you might forget to add something to an entry's description. You might need to add another copy. You might have just missed something. So it's always important to double check your entries, all the time, but especially when it comes to splitting your entries. So these are kind of our different steps. So I didn't go too much into these because this is kind of what we're going to be walking through today in terms of an example and walking through these different steps. So I want to make sure you guys are all comfortable with these. So we're going to go ahead and get right into our sample today. So first things first, I said we start out with our description, right? So when it comes to looking at our description, I just popped one in up here. There's a lot going on. So my coalition just held a 1-hour prevention training on the dangers of alcohol and marijuana to 100 local parents. This is the first time that we are providing this training to parents, so we wanted to make sure to add that into our description. We also wanted to make sure that we were including all of our resources that we generated throughout this specific event. So we ended up having 2 volunteers from the coalition help provide the training and help the coordinator set up. So they each donated 2 hours, so we wanted to put that in there. We also had our training room donated by the local school board. That usually goes for $100 an hour, and we reserved the room for 2 hours for accurate, setup and takedown time. We also had mileage donated from those 2 volunteers to get to the training, and they each donated 20 miles. So we had a total of 40 miles. We kind of showed our math there. It's always helpful to show your math just to kind of obviously double check yourself and make sure that you're getting the right numbers in. But also for your scorer to make sure, you're doing the math correct as well, and that we can see that and see what the actual resources generated was. And then the last thing we had here is that we also distributed 2 informational flyers to the parents to take home, and we distributed a total of 150. Now, a lot going on, right, guys? There's a lot to dissect in here. So the big thing, and the thing that I sometimes recommend to people when it comes to breaking things up, is that step 2, identifying your outputs. I like to color code mine. Sometimes it's helpful to do this in a Word document. Don't be afraid, guys, to have a Word document up when you're doing your reach entries. Type out your description, and I like to color code what type of outputs I have when I'm reading through my description. Because for me, that helps me make sure that I'm checking all those boxes and getting all those output types in. And at the same time, I can double check and be like, okay, did I have a service provided? Did I have a community change? What did I have here? What did I miss? It's definitely helpful in terms of that check and balance system. All right, Jackie said, oh, that question was for, oh, okay, sorry, sorry, Jen. Yeah, you guys are both in as Jackie, but yes, you guys will be getting the slides when we're done. So if for some reason the email doesn't go to you, Jen, I'll make sure to send them your way. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and look through our different output types now and read through that description we just saw and highlight and color code what we have to enter. The first thing is going to be the service provided aspect and the community change aspect. So the main part we have here is that we provided a training to 100 parents for 1 hour. Clear as day that that is a service provided, right, guys? We're providing a training, so we want to make sure to record that as such. Next, we have that this is our first time providing this type of training to our parents specifically in the community. So we want to also make sure to highlight that as a community change. So we made that red. All right, the next thing we're going to do is look at our next part of our description. And these are a little bit easier. Obviously, these are our resources generated. So we had our 2 volunteers. We want to make sure to highlight that in purple. We had our training room donated. That's going to be in kind for our space that was donated. And then we had our mileage donated from our volunteers. We got that in there as well. And then our last piece of our description that we're going to highlight is the distribution of our informational flyers, which we're going to highlight green for media. So like I said, guys, this can be very helpful for picking out those different pieces, because as we can see here, we can now count up and say, all right, we're going to have 1 entry, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different entries for this one event that we had, for this one training that we hosted. So in terms of entering your data in Reach, it helps you, again, do that check and balance system. You can double check that you have 6 entries in. However, the whole point of today, and as we know, guys, the whole point of today is to go through breaking them up by problem goal. So it's great that we got to this point. It's great that we are now seeing what types of outputs we need to be recording for this specific training. However, the big key part here is that we can see that this training talked about alcohol and marijuana. So right away in your mind, you should see, oh, 2 problem goals, which means we should break this up if we can. Sometimes we understand it's not easy and it's not really possible to break things up, and that's completely okay. That's why we have that general ATOD feature as your catch-all for your logic model alignment. So it's completely okay if this was not something that you could break up, and putting it under general ATOD is fine. However, we really, really, really encourage our clients to take that next step to really think through, is this something we could break up? Because at the end of the day, we want you guys to have the best data you could possibly have. And the best data is going to be data that's representational of those outputs and goals that you're working towards, right? So at the end of the day, if we can break it up, we want to. So in terms of this entry, we're going to make it a little bit clearer on how we're going to break this up. So when it comes to the description, we're going to pull out these 2 bolded parts first, because in my mind, this is what I want to break up by problem goal. My resources were very general. We can't really say that we used 1 hour for volunteer time for alcohol and 1 for marijuana. It's just not as easy to break up. And same with my training room and my miles donated. Resources are very difficult to break up. Sometimes you can. However, a lot of times it's something that I tend to keep under general ATOD because it's not always easiest to determine. However, these 2 bolded parts that we have kind of popped out are going to be the ones that we can divide up by problem goal. So that's going to be the ones that we're going to break up today. So the first one we had was our services provided. We know that we provided a 1-hour training on the dangers of alcohol and marijuana to 100 parents. Remember, we had our services provided in gray, so that's why it's gray over here. Now, when it comes to actually putting this into my data entry form over here, I'm looking at this description and I'm like, it doesn't really scream splitting of an entry to me, right? Like, it's missing some information. So what I decided to do is I thought through it a little bit more, and I was like, okay, well, based on our training and how the flow or the agenda goes for our trainings, we usually spend about the first half of it on alcohol and the second half on marijuana. So I added that information to my description here so that then when my scorer is reviewing this data, they can see, oh, you know, they spent 30 minutes of this training talking about alcohol and the second 30 minutes talking about marijuana. That's why, you know, Jessica split up this entry to reflect those 2 different logic models, because it was an even split and they could divide that up as such. Now, to continue on with breaking up our entry, we also said that we had a community change, right? This is the first time we're providing this training to parents. We can also break this up by the problem goal addressed as well. Since we spoke on alcohol for the first half and marijuana for the second, this community change piece can stay the same. We just want to tack it on to what we have written in there for our service provided. And we would want to break it up into 2 entries as well. The last piece that's going to need a little bit more additional information is going to be that media piece. So we can break this one up as well. However, again, how we originally wrote it it's not quite telling of how we're going to break this up, right? It's not really saying that it was one or the other. So at the end of the day, I thought about it and I was like, well, technically we distributed 150 to each of those who wanted to take them. Some of them were from the same household, so we only gave them, 2 copies. So at the end of the day, one of our flyers was about alcohol and the other one was about marijuana. So to rewrite my description for the media piece, I went ahead and said distributed 2 informational flyers to parents to take home, 150 total distributed, 75 on alcohol and 75 on marijuana. This, again, something very simple, minute piece of information that I had to add, but it makes it so much clearer for my evaluator and my scorer to see, hey, she said that half of these were on marijuana and half of these were on alcohol. That's why she split it the way she did. The big thing when it comes to splitting your entries, guys, is making sure that you're splitting those numbers. So if I were to record this in Reach, I wouldn't put 150 under alcohol and 150 under marijuana, because that's technically saying that I distributed 300 flyers. So just make sure when you are splitting entries, you are splitting the correct numbers in half as well. So now that we have our descriptions that we want, we're going to go ahead and put them together into one and check our boxes that we want to record for Reach. So the first thing we're going to do is type in our description, provided 1 hour prevention training on the dangers of alcohol and marijuana to 100 parents. First half of the training was on alcohol and the second half of the training was on marijuana. This is the first time providing this training to parents. We distributed 2 informational flyers to the parents to take home, with 150 total, with 75 being on alcohol and 75 being on marijuana. That is what I would go with for my description, and I can tell you guys right now that would be a great description to have for scoring and review purposes. I can tell you I would be completely okay with it. All right, so now that we have our descriptions for the split up part, we're going to go ahead and look at how we're going to record this in Reach. So when it comes to our entry, oops, sorry guys, can't find my mouse. There it is. So when it comes to our entries, we selected our different output types here. And as we know, we then have to fill in some more information, right? So when it comes to entering these, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to enter the alcohol ones first, use our lovely copy button, and copy them to enter the marijuana ones. That's the easiest way to do it based on how Reach currently functions. So what I would do is I'd put in my description, my date, select my 3 output types, community change, service provided, and media. I would make sure that this is half of what I am entering. So if I'm entering my alcohol work first, we're going to go ahead and under services provided, put our number served as 100, because that stays the same. No matter what, we were always serving 100 people. What gets cut in half here is going to be your actual length of service that you provided. Since the first 30 minutes was on alcohol, we want to put in 30 minutes for a length of service, or 0.5. For our media as well, same thing. We're splitting it, so we're going to put it under media type of newsletter flyer, in our media impressions as 75. Same thing if they go out digitally or through a email campaign or whatever, your impressions would be the number that you sent. The easiest way is to then copy these entries. So you're going to click these, submit, add them into your lovely Reach system. And then we would have to go out there and copy, or you can copy the description and just start a new entry and enter all 3 of the ones for marijuana. It's kind of up to you. Sometimes it's easy to just copy the description and start out with a blank slate because the system's going to let you copy 1 output at a time, not all 3. So just make sure, whatever way you do it, you're double checking that you're not accidentally duplicating entries and making sure that you're definitely changing the problem goal here when it comes to entering those. All right. So When it comes to splitting your entries, remember guys, we said we originally counted out 6 outputs we'd have. Now that we've split up our entry into alcohol and marijuana, where we can, for this one training that we provided, we're technically going to now have 9 outputs or 9 entries in reach. We're going to have our 3 for alcohol, our 3 for marijuana, and then we're also going to have our 3 for our resources generated that we're keeping under general. So don't be afraid to pull things out like this. And like I said, sometimes I love having that Word document next to me and being able to put my description in there and write and pull things out, highlight things, know what I've entered and know what I still need to put in. Because it's a lot. It can be a lot sometimes. I mean, 9 outputs for just one training that we're hosting, that's a lot, right? So making sure that we are not missing anything or accidentally copying something too many times is a really big step. So with that being said, guys, we kind of talked about splitting up entries, entering our non-split up entries, and then our last step is, like I said, always double check. That's another reason it's really helpful to keep that Word document on the side, because you can highlight as you go, or as you put them into reach, highlight the ones you've done. I know some people use Excels as well, perfectly fine, whichever is easiest for you. I just recommend having something on the side because it helps you know, hey, I missed something, or hey, I entered everything I needed to for that event that we held. Because you guys do a lot of work. I mean, you guys are always constantly busy people getting work done in your communities, and it's important work. So we want to make sure that we're not missing anything at the end of the day, because it helps you guys tell your story. When we get that data in reach, we get out good reports, helps you guys tell your story, helps show the community the efforts you're making. It really helps the buy-in for people, right? You know, groups that can prove that their work they're doing has an impact definitely is a huge selling point for community members who might want to get involved. So at the end of the day, always double check your entries, always make sure we're not missing anything. Alrighty, guys. Well, with that, thank you all for joining me today, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, guys.